quite a few people. We may have more people joining us, but I'll
Okay.
do that brief introduction. Uh,
Yes.
so everyone, welcome. Lisa founded Langell Photography in 2010 as part of a part-time adventure. Eventually transitioning to full-time photography in 2015 after leaving her corporate and consulting roles. She has since earned numerous awards and has been published in prestigious outlets such as Outdoor Photography, Arizona Highways, Ranger Rick, and Images Arizona. She's recognized globally for her artistic, ethereal, and emotional nature photography, particularly in the areas of birds and mammals. Uh, she offers a number of workshops and is very well known for taking people on wonderful photo adventures in Alaska. So I will mention that if you want to ask questions, please put them in the chat area and then Lisa will get to those. But welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Gosh, I can't even think of how long ago this was that we planned this, but I know it's been on my calendar for a while.
It
So,
has.
yeah, I am. I think I'll have to double check, but I think you are the last camera club that I am working with in 2025. I think from here on out, everyone's like holiday focused. So,
Right.
thanks for wrapping up the year with me. It's been quite an incredibly busy year, but a good year. I hope it's been a good year for many of you. That said, I know there's always challenges that the year throws. I hope if you've had those, you're making it through those. I know those things are tough. But I'm going to pivot a little bit today and talk about the artistic side. And if you just jumped in, Marianne and I were talking a lot about just how creatively winter sometimes gives you the doldrums, right? You're sort of like, okay, I don't know. I live in the northern climates. I used to, by the way, for 30 odd years, live in Michigan. I understand everything's the color of concrete for 6 months of the year. And although this isn't going to specifically talk about how to photograph snow, that'd be a good high key class of mine to take. But I wanted to give you some things that you can kind of take with you. And I feel so often when I photograph things, people are like, oh, that's so artistic, or oh, that's so creative. And those two terms sort of get interchanged. And and yet I've noticed over the years, there's no set way to be creative or artistic. I can't go, here's your 3 steps to creativity. Here's how you are creative or you aren't. It's a process. And a particular client of mine, a gentleman, he was an engineer, and well, he's retired now, but he was an engineer, and he used to take private sessions with me, and he would say, Lisa, I don't know what it is, but every time I take classes with you and I do things, I go, he said, you bring out the creativity in me. And I said, well, that's an honor. I go, I don't even realize at the time that I was doing that. We were just doing different things that made him think in different ways. And he was kind of the inspiration for this presentation because I realize that so much about creativity and what it is and what it isn't, and also that there is something creative in everyone, and I'll get into that in a minute. But what he went through really inspired me to do this because I feel like there's so many that are kind of in the same situation. You might be stuck, you might feel not very creative. I know the engineer types and the numbers folks and people that consider themselves left-brained, even though that kind of left brain, right brain thing has been debunked in all the scientific literature, but the concept is still there. This is for you, but it really is for everybody, and I'm excited to do it. I am going to share my screen with all of you, and we are going to get this party started. Not that screen, not that screen. Hold on. Let me get my PowerPoint up. There we go. All right, so bring this back to the top, and we will get started. I'm going to also suggest that, let me switch my screens here. I just switched computers and getting all the things set up. I spent a week reorganizing my office and getting a whole new thing set up. I am going to put in the chat window a quick hello. I am also going to put my, not that, I put a picture in there. The wrong thing showed up in my chat window. Anyway, we'll figure it out, but I'll put hello in there. And anyway, I invite you throughout this session, type in comments. I'm going to be asking you some questions from time to time. Feel free and type them in the chat window. And At the end, I'll answer any questions, try to save most of them for the end. But if you do have questions in the middle, feel free. And most of all, if I'm asking you something, respond in there. We're going to take a look at those. All right, so let's get started for all of you who are interested in becoming a little more artistic, a little more creative. This is for you. So, as as a photographer, I love, inspirational quotes. As a person, I love inspirational quotes. I was a psychologist for 20 years, and I don't know, I find people, yes, they can be frustrating sometimes, but I really find a lot of inspiration in the things people say. But in photography, I really found this particular quote to be quite, I don't know, it just struck me really well. The two most engaging powers of a photograph are to make new things familiar and familiar things new. And that was by William Makepeace Thackeray. And that was like 100 and some years ago that he said that. And I love, 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 love this quote. And I think it so defines how we find our own vision in photography and see how we uniquely see. Like Marianne was just talking about, like, oh, I love your photography, Lisa. It's, you capture the emotion in things. And, I don't set out as a photographer, go, I'm going to go capture emotion. That's going to be my style. But I have gravitated to that over the years, and it's become my style because it's my taste. I really love capturing the way things feel. And so, anyhow, I think this quote can be quite inspiring on its own, and I wanted to start that out. Maybe you can take that with you in your next photography journey. But what I really want to talk about is how we get to that artistic place in photography. How do we get that mindset going, kind of get in that flow state with creativity and so forth? But the first thing I want to do is just ask you, what do you think the correlation is between creativity and intelligence? And what I mean by correlation is the relationship. How closely related are creativity and intelligence? And I ask you because I get asked this question from time to time. And so I want you to, in the chat window, I want you to go and type in low, medium, or high and just type that into the chat window, what you think, and we'll talk about it. And if you see me looking off this way, it's because my chat window is on a separate screen over here. So you tell me low, medium, or high for the correlation, everyone. And thank you, by the way. See, Marianne chimed in first. Thanks for chiming in. This doesn't work so well, and it isn't so much fun if everybody doesn't participate. So I do appreciate you taking a minute to do that. And Steve, I like your comment about it depends on what kind of intelligence. Right now, I'm just speaking generically, um, but I see a couple of lows, a high, three more lows, and it depends. I'll give it a couple more seconds here, and then we will talk about it. All right, that might be all of the comments that I'm getting from the group at the moment. Okay, I got 17 people online. I'll hopefully get a few more responses for the next one. All right, so the correlation between creativity and intelligence, when you look at the literature, and keep in mind this, my whole background was in educational psychology. So this was my wheelhouse when I was working as a psychologist. But the actual answer is, drum roll, low. So the relationship between how creative you are and how intelligent you are, there's actually very little relationship there, if any at all. And the reason why I bring this up is some people, when we're out shooting and whatnot, or if they look at a picture of mine or somebody else's, or even like a sculpture or a poem or anything, you'll say, oh gosh, I'm not smart enough to come up with something like that. I couldn't think of that on my own. How do people come up with these things? How do you get, look at it just as a visual example you can do in your head. Think of a Picasso painting. How do you come up with that? And a lot of times people mistakenly think that somehow there are these mystical, brain cells and intelligence that this person has that another person doesn't have. And that's the differentiator between creativity and those that don't have creativity. And so I just want to point out that there is no strong relationship between creativity and intelligence. And I can tell you firsthand, when I used to work with kids with disabilities, and again, I was an educational psychologist. I worked a lot with kids with cognitive issues, disabilities. I worked with gifted and talented kids, and on and on. And I saw some pretty creative adaptive behaviors by kids who had some certainly difficult cognitive challenges. So you can come up with workarounds to things, right? And everybody has different types and skills, and intelligence is something that is a difficult thing to measure. I'll save all of that for another day. But in other words, doesn't matter how smart or maybe not so smart someone is, it has no impact on your creativity. All right. So again, just to reiterate that, psychological studies show that there's no relationship between intelligence and creativity. In other words, creativity is not dependent on your smartness or your intelligence. So the other question that I get is, is creativity innate or is it learned? And so I looked at some of the data around this, and the data suggests, and I'm going to go into the law of effect here for a minute, but the law of effect, which I'll cover in a second, suggests that creativity is learned more so than it is something innate. So I want to get into that a little bit more. We will get into some photography stuff in a minute, but it's important to have this kind of leading information going in. And so the plan for tonight is going to be to define artistic and creativity because we need to operationalize this. We need to be on the same page about what all this stuff means, and then we can dig into how to solve for it. Um, Another thing I want to get into today is, do you have imaginative skill and problem solving abilities? Because that is tied to all of this as well. And then I'm going to teach you a mashup formula. This is my own made up term, but a mashup formula for creativity. I'm going to debunk a few myths about creativity and artistry. We just debunked one about the intelligence and creativity already, because sometimes that is a myth that people believe. And then I'm going to give you some photography learning exercises, at least three, that you can do alone or with your group. So if you're at a camera club meeting in the future or a get together, these are things that you can apply. Or if you have a few friends you want to, go out and be creative with, these are things you can do. So, first of all, what is artistic photography? And the interesting thing is, I couldn't really come up with a definition. Like, I Google searched and all of those things when I put this presentation together, and there really wasn't a definition of artistic photography, yet I hear that term all the time. So, what are we talking about with that? And so it was helpful for me when I couldn't find a definition for it to work from that we look at the definition of the two words. And I know this sounds like really basic, but we're going to go through it. There's a purpose to this. So, first of all, what is artistic? So, I looked it up, Merriam-Webster's, and artistic is relating to a characteristic of art or artists, like artistic subjects or an artistic success, or showing imaginative skill in arrangement or execution. And interestingly enough, Merriam-Webster's definition included an example using artistic photography, which I thought was pretty cool. And so I loved, though, this part of the definition, imaginative skill in arrangement or execution. And so imaginative skill in arrangement or execution is something I need you to hold on to for a second while we go look at creativity. And in that definition, by the way, was very similar to artistic, but it too referenced imaginative skill. And so then I look at creativity from Merriam's, and it says ability to produce something new through imaginative skill, whether a new solution to a problem, a new method or device, or a new artistic object or form. So these words are different, but they share a lot of common denominality, and imaginative skill is one of them. So the fact that that came up twice intrigued me. So then I had to look up what is a skill. All right, so you think you know what that is. But a skill, I love this definition too, a learned power of doing something competently. It didn't say some magical, mystical power bequeathed to some of us at birth. It's a learned power of doing something competently. So when I think of people who are or aren't artistic and they say, oh, I could never be artistic in that way, this by definition is showing you that these are learned powers, that these aren't bequeathed powers. And that tells me that, all right, this is doable, right? Along with a whole bunch of other science that we can see. But we're going to walk through that a little bit. So that learned power was important to me. So then what is artistic photography then? Well, we know what photography is. So artistic photography, in lieu of a working definition that's available on the internet somewhere, because I haven't found one, artistic photography is an original photograph that is competently created through the photographer's imaginative skill and learned powers. So if a skill is a learned power, imagination, we can develop that imaginative skill. It's not bequeathed imagination, it's imaginative skill and learned powers. That means this is doable. So why are some of us quote unquote better at it than others? We can dig into that in a minute, but I think you're going to see a theme going forth. And so I really did this just to show you this is not intangible. This is not something that some people are good at and some people aren't good at because they can't. It's something learned, and we can learn this. And, that to me makes it feel a lot more doable than magical. And that's what I want. I really want you to understand this is doable stuff. So sometimes we feel like we're in a creative rut. This is a real rut in Arizona after a big flood washed through the desert and ruined part of the road. But we've all been in those creative ruts, and we feel so, I don't know, uh, feeble and literally unimaginative, like you got nothing, right? And we've all been there. We've all been those days where you walk around, you're like, I just don't see anything to photograph. I'm stuck. And I get that. There's nothing wrong with that. That actually can be useful in pushing your creativity, because when there is a bunch of stuff to photograph, you're just looking at the stuff and taking pictures because you're like, oh, that landscape's pretty, or oh, that flower's pretty. It's when there isn't something to photograph that and I'm using that in air quotes, that you really need to apply those creative skills. And so let's talk a little bit about the imaginative skills and the problem solving skills. So in the chat room, I want you to think of a problem that you've solved recently and type it in the chat window, just in a sentence or so. Like, maybe the plumbing went in your house and you figured out a way to fix it. Or I don't know, you were making a recipe and had to soup something for something else. Or you solved a computer issue, whatever it might be in the last month, let's say. What kind of problem have you solved? Maybe you work, in accounting and you're trying to figure out somebody's, bookkeeping that got screwed up, or I don't know what it is, but go ahead and put it in the chat room, whatever it might be. Can be a little thing or a huge thing. You guys must be thinking of a problem that you're solving. Lost internet and resolved. That's a pain in the butt when that happens. A new computer won't recognize my peripherals. Oh, that's also a pain. Life goes on and I don't have time for putzing with it, slowly tackling each one. I give you credit, Jill. That and Diane, your problems, computer problems can test the very last essence of patience we have. Troy, now this is not an Arizona problem, at least Southern Arizona. I figured out I need to turn the key on to start my snowblower. Oh my gosh. So the good news is that you haven't had to start it in a while, I suppose. Unplugging a bathroom drain from Brian. I love it. Singing a new arrangement in a quartet. Steve, that is very cool. My mom used to do Sweet Adelines, and I always loved the female or the men's quartets in Sweet Adeline's Barbershop Harmony. I don't know if you do barbershop or not, but I always was fascinated with that. So singing arrangement, definitely new and challenging. I learned how to put videos together in Movie Maker. Kim, that's awesome. Uh, Someone who is anonymous said, spent more time when you can't think of what what to photograph. That is so true. All right, so you're finding solutions to these things, and you might have had to rack your brain a little bit and test your patience a whole lot, but you're finding solutions. All right, we'll keep that in mind. I'm going to come back to that. So, all of you in those solutions had to go through some challenges and had to probably apply a bunch of different things that you don't even realize you applied in order to come up with those solutions. And it's similar with photography. Except your problem isn't, you can't start your snowblower or, you're not sure how to fix the computer issues you're having. Your problem is that you're out, I'm going to say out in the field. Maybe it's indoors, but let's just say out in the field and you're looking around and nothing is coming to you to photograph and you feel challenged. Or you are looking at something like, I'll pick something easy, Statue of Liberty. Well, yeah, a bunch of people have photographed it, and I bet you a lot of them went and looked and took a picture, and they all kind of end up looking the same. So, you're trying to put your creative spin on it. So this is just a little technique when you're out, even before you go out in the field. I like to do this myself, and this is a great activity as a group. You could literally do this on a Zoom call. But the mashup is the concept that I like to kind of break into that creative mentality. And so mashup number one in this case is I like to list love-hate relationships. You as a group could come up with dozens of them, but I just came up with a few. So on the red column, it's things I typically dislike. On the blue columns, it's things I typically love. And, they don't have to be even columns. It's just a quick smattering of things. So I think photographically in these cases, I mean, these are I will say I love-hate relationships with regard to photography, but I bet you could come up with some other non-photographically, uh, you know, leaning things. The things I typically dislike are close-ups of roses, clear blue skies. Gosh, we get a lot of them in Arizona, and I'm not rubbing it in right now, but sometimes you're just dying for a cloud here to photograph. Birds just standing there. I'm a bird photographer, many things photographer, but birds are my first love. Lifeless shots, cliche photographs of birds, rainy days. I like rainy days, but I also don't, right? They're a pain in the ass and you're cold. Boring eagle shots. And I say this because I do a tremendous amount of work in Alaska. I'm up there probably about 9 weeks a year running workshops. There are a lot of beautiful eagles up there, but you can get a lot of really boring eagle shots. And busy backgrounds. I love clean, simple images. So these are things I typically avoid when I'm photographing. These are things I love. I love birds in general. I love patterns and textures. I love the moon. Old trees, like, oh, there's nothing better than an old tree to photograph. I just love them. Silhouettes, bears, old barns, abstracts, dead trees. So I have old trees and then they're dead. Eagles, gloomy days. So these are just a few. The list goes on and on. So of those, you as a group or individuals could start listing these things out on your own. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a mashup and you're going to have to shoot for that mashup. So in this case, mashup number one that's going to ignite your creativity here is I'm going to pick two things from these columns, one from the things I dislike and one from the things I love. So I disliked, I picked boring eagle shots. And the things I love are silhouettes, and I genuinely love silhouettes. All right. So how can I come up with something creative from boring eagle shots and silhouettes? Well, in this column, I'm going to try to take the essence of what's here and do it better and include something that I circled here. So I'm going to take boring eagle shots. How can I make a better eagle shot instead of like the boring ones I'll show you in a minute and also include silhouettes? And so in this case, those are my selections. And I love silhouettes. Like they gravitate, they're just, I don't know, they give me a feeling that I just really, really love, as do many people. So I love silhouettes, but I dislike those eagles. And I consider this a very boring eagle shot. It's like it's just a bird flying there in a blue sky, like nothing compelling other than there it is. And in Alaska, I mean, if you've never photographed an eagle before, this is great. But in Alaska, this would just never see the light of day because there's so many more amazing things that we can do with eagles. But I see a lot of this online, right? Here's my eagle shot. And again, I'm no shame. But we level up as photographers over time. And I see Charlie saying, I was trying to photograph a monarch, and every time I tried to photograph it, it would fly away. Then I was taking a photo of a flower and a monarch flew into the photo, and he goes, how does that happen? Exactly. Like sometimes the serendipity is amazing. So our mashup here, I'm going to do this in an algebraic formula for those that are math-minded and feel like you may not have a lot of creativity. I'm putting this in a mathematical formula. So stands for silhouettes. BES stands for boring eagle photos. And that's going to be our mashup. So silhouettes minus a boring eagle shot. Now, we can have eagles, but we just don't want it quite so boring. But we also want something different. Like even nice eagle shots, there's a multitude of those. Like what else can we do that's different? So by combining two totally different things, we can come up with something new. So here is the concept. Here's the mathematical formula. And the challenge is going to be to pair eagles and silhouettes in new ways that aren't boring. All right, and that's the first shot that I came up with, where I had an opportunity to find an eagle in silhouette. And what's interesting to me is most of the eagle shots, 99% of the eagle shots that I see, like if you look at social media or whatever, that's how most of my photographs of friends and acquaintances and strangers and whatnot come my way, is by looking at social media. Probably for most of you. And when I see eagle pictures, I never see eagle silhouettes. So the fact that when I did this mashup arbitrarily and it came up with silhouettes, it's kind of interesting to me because I wanted to do something different. So this was the thing. And my gosh, when we're photographing eagles, our natural intuition is to go and find the right side of the light. We're not thinking go and photograph an eagle in silhouette. So by looking for that, I was ignoring other things, which is good. I had to stay focused, and I found this shot that I would have never normally shot because the light is wrong, quote unquote, right? So, I shot this with my Tamron 50 to 400. This was at 400 millimeters. You have the mountains and a glacier in Alaska in the background. It just made a nice silhouette of this eagle out on these pilings in the bay. And so that's mashup number one. And then here's mashup number two. So I went wider, which usually we don't think of going wide with an animal or, wildlife shot. But I went wide and used all of these, and you still have the nice layers in the background. And the eagle happened to flap its wings here, and it just gave, another nice, non-boring eagle silhouette. But again, if I just go out and photograph eagles, I'm not thinking like, let's work on finding a silhouette shot of them. And so this simple mashup pushed new ingredients into my repertoire for photographing eagles. And I think you'll see when you go look at eagle pictures online that your friends have shot, very rarely do I ever see a silhouette. So it gets use in that kind of creative direction. So mashup number two, just to kind of take it up a notch. I'm going to now pick a few things out of this list. So I've got boring birds on sticks because, oh my gosh, love birds, but so often when we're photographing them, they're just standing on a stick somewhere or standing in the water somewhere, not really doing anything dynamic. And so I tend to avoid those. Those are things I dislike. Sadly, it's a lot of what birds do is stand on a stick or stand in the water. But anyway, I do typically love birds. I love the moon, and I'm gonna keep that silhouette theme in there. So, what can I do to avoid boring birds on sticks, yet incorporate some of these other things into the photography? And let me just mute everyone because there we go. I was getting some feedback, so I apologize for muting someone, but I think it got unmuted on accident. Okay, so this is going to be my formula for the mashup. And I'm going to come in here using these particular things, and I'm going to try to create some photographs that incorporate all of those. So definitely a level up, but things I wouldn't have maybe done normally. So yes, I love the silhouettes. I love birds. I've been a birder since I was 8 years old. That's how I got into photography around the same age. And I definitely have a better camera now than I did then. But I love birds. I dislike the birds on a stick, and they're beautiful birds. I just like this picture doesn't do much for me. It doesn't make me feel something. And to quote Marianne, she likes how I capture the feeling, the emotion in something. So I don't feel like this ever does it. All right, so boring birds on a stick has to go. That becomes our problem to solve. Just like you were solving the problems with the snowblower and the computers and on and on. The creativity, the quote unquote lack of it, is just a problem to solve. And we're all smart enough to solve most of these problems. I wish we could solve some of the bigger problems in the world, but we can at least solve the photographic ones. So that's a problem to solve. So again, I like the moon. This is a feature in a mountain here in Arizona, not terribly far from me, called Praying Hands. And the moon was rising over it. I love the full moon. But I dislike when I see shots like this every month because people will be like, I just got a long lens and I'm going to photograph the moon. And we've all seen that, right? And it's, again, no shame in that because you're excited you got this new lens. But there's a billion pictures of just the moon shot through a long lens and posted online. Like I'm craving something different. This doesn't really get me emotionally like the previous one did. So I dislike that. That becomes another problem to solve. So our formula, if you will, silhouettes, moon, M equals moon. BBS, boring birds on sticks. So here's our little formula. Now we're getting into a little algebra. So silhouette plus moon minus a boring bird on a stick, right? We can still have a bird on a stick. It just can't be boring. So we're going to avoid that. That's going to be our mashup. And this creates an interesting challenge because if you're just doing this, and I encourage you to do it before you go out in the field, because if you just go out in the field and you come up with this formula, like you're probably not going to find the solution. But if you create challenges for yourselves ahead of time, then you can go through some of them and go, you know what? I'm going to X park today and I'm going in the afternoon. What of these challenges, knowing what's there, could I maybe pick from to stimulate my creativity and pick one or two or three? Typically, less is more. So start out with one or two and see what you come up with. So it takes a little while to find, the silhouette, the moon, and a not boring bird on a stick. But what I do have is the ability to keep it fresh in my repertoire. I keep it in my mind. And then when I go out, I can start looking for these specific opportunities to photograph these things. And what's fun is trying to find the place and trying to find all the moments where this could come together. You might have to use, photo pills or photographer's ephemeris to figure out where's the moon going to rise, where I might find some birds in the background, or, however you're imagining some compositions. But anyway, that's my matchup. And that's going to force my creativity and come up with a more interesting photo than just another photo of the same thing. And so that's our problem to solve, and we can solve it. And how I solved this challenge, it wasn't overnight, but I solved it like this. I happened to be in La Jolla, California. It happened to be at a time when the moon was rising, and there is a big cliff right behind me in this photo, like literally right behind me. I was laying on the ground with my 500 millimeter with a 1.4 teleconverter, so I was shooting at about 700 millimeters, and then I had a crop sensor camera at the time, and so this is about 1100 millimeters, and I was trying to get this cormorant that was drying its wings in the evening with this moon quickly rising from the horizon in the same frame, in the same shot. I couldn't back up more. So you're going to crack up at this, but this was shot at an aperture of f40 in order to get this in focus and this somewhat in focus. And I don't mind that it's softly focused. I think it kind of creates some nice visual tension there, and they don't compete with each other. They support each other. But that's beside the point. It was just a challenging situation, and that moon is rising quickly. So I kept having to recompose and scoot this way and that way. It was kind of a challenge, but it was so fun to be able to think of, okay, hey, I'm in a situation where there's birds in some of these trees, and tonight the moon is going to be rising at a good time, and planning for some of that and also waiting for some serendipity. But coming up with a shot that I honestly, looking around at all the things, if I hadn't been hunting for that, I wouldn't have come up with this shot on my own in most cases. It just wouldn't have been in my repertoire. So that's the mashup in that particular case. But then your learning generalizes and you're like, oh, I like the way that turned out. I'm going to try it again somewhere else. So now I'm at Bosque del Apache, which is a national wildlife refuge in Socorro, near Socorro, New Mexico. I'm heading there in a couple of weeks again to do workshops. But this was another one. The moon was rising and these geese were flying through. This is absolutely as shot, no exposure changes, nothing. But I knew to plan for those things. I'm like, okay, the moon's going to be rising on this particular day. The geese come through. How can I capture this? And believe me, it takes a lot of trial and error to get this. A lot of birds, you find the flock early, you expose for the moon, and then you go and find the birds and you track the birds. And it's real dark away from the moon, you don't have a lot of contrast. So focus is hard. And then you're tracking as they're flying and you think, oh, this flock looks like it's going to intercept the moon. And then it flies just above it or just below it, or they turn or some silly thing. So there's a lot of like practice to get this and a lot of betting on each flock of birds that flies by as to whether or not this will happen. But every once in a while it turns out. But I wouldn't have done this either if it wouldn't have been for that original shot that I captured. All right. And then more learning generalizes. So now I'm like, well, let's try it at a different time of day. Instead of where the skies are darker, let's do it when the moon, I think this was setting at this point. And we were here in the next morning and the birds are flying by. It was nice and pretty. But yeah, I could incorporate the moon and incorporate the flock. And I was very happy with all of that. All right. Mashup number three, just to give you a little more. So busy backgrounds. Oh, that's the nemesis in a lot of my photography. I'm very picky about foregrounds and backgrounds and lighting and all that. It's got to create the right mood for me. And so busy backgrounds tend to be a challenge. I'm still going to keep with my silhouettes. I've kept that theme through all three of these challenges. And I'm going to introduce bears. So these are things that I love. So now I'm in Alaska and I've got to figure out this challenge of how do I find busy backgrounds? Well, that is not hard, right? Bears are coming in and out of the woods and there's a lot of busy backgrounds and I want to avoid that. And it can be challenging. Finding a bear that has a simple background where there's not bushes and foliage and trees and things close behind it, unless you're out on the mudflats can be challenging. So now I've really got to narrow down where my areas are I can capture these and what I can do because I want to avoid a busy background in theory. But what if I could incorporate busy in a really interesting way? And this didn't occur to me right away until the moment was literally right in front of my face. But I gave it a whirl and it worked. So I'm trying to use this as my mashup. Busy backgrounds is something I want to avoid, silhouettes and bears. Or if you're going to use a busy background, use it in a creative way. And that becomes my third mashup. And that's going to be where my creativity starts. And that's how I ended up solving my problem this way. So here's an abstract. Now, it was a pretty bright day. There were a lot of water reflections in the mudflats as the tide was, and I don't remember if it was coming in or going out, but you kind of got all these different patterns in the tide. And I was up on a knoll shooting a little bit down on this bear, so you could see all these layers. That was just coincidence. And normally I'm thinking, oh gosh, the bear's in the wrong light. It's a hot light kind of day, all the wrong things. And then it really dawned on me, this is the perfect opportunity to check that checkbox on that creativity challenge. And I shot the bear as a silhouette and then used all of this stuff, almost like a bear in an abstract. And I really liked that. You know, obviously not every busy background is going to work, but instead of just avoiding the busy backgrounds, which is our second nature, I'm like, oh, I have a busy background. Now it's busy in a visually pleasing way, but it makes for an unusual shot, and I happen to really like it. There's the full shot so you can see it. All right, law of effect. I'm coming back to this when we talked about it in the very beginning. So, the law of effect means that responses that produce a satisfying effect in a particular situation become more likely to occur again. This is like if you went to a local restaurant and you ordered the steak, and the steak comes and it's tender and flavored and seasoned right and aged just right, and the texture's good, and all of it is delicious. If you're a steak person, you'll probably go back to that restaurant and order another steak at some point. But if it came and it's kind of gristly and they overcooked it and wasn't seasoned well, nothing really sat well with you, you're probably not going to order the steak again, and you may not ever even go to that restaurant again. That's in essence the law of effect. Responses that produce a satisfying effect become more likely to occur again. This is human behavior, right? This is just basic human behavior. And similarly, when we talk about responses that produce a discomforting effect, those are less likely to be repeating. So you go to the restaurant, the steak's terrible, you're probably not going to go back and get that steak again. And if you do, you're like, oh, I'm going to give it a second whirl, and you still get bad results. That's pretty much going to clinch the deal that you're not coming back. All right. So those things are the same in almost everything we do in life, unless we're forced to do it. These are just general human tendencies. And this is the law of effect. And so I hear people often in and out of my workshops say, "Oh, I never would have thought of that." Like, give them a suggestion, or why don't you photograph this way and, pose this way with the light this way and use this lens and see what you get. And somebody will say, "Oh, I never would have thought of that." Or if you're sharing images from the group and we're all photographing a similar area, and you've probably done this as well. You all go to the same place and you come back with different stuff and you look at somebody else's picture and you're like, "I was standing right next to you. How did you get that? I never saw that. I never would have thought of that." This is for you guys. So, as a little history, I was a floral designer for about 15 years. This is me. So I don't remember the exact date of this, but somewhere right around 1990, I worked as at a florist, and I loved it. I genuinely loved it. I was really good at what I did. It was one of my favorite things I've ever done in my life, and I luckily got to do it for 15 years. So that's me. And I used to create, this is an AI simulation because I have none of these photos anymore, but I used to create giant floral pieces, big focal pieces for high-end homes back in Michigan. So I worked with interior designers and I would design, little pieces too, but a lot of big statement pieces on the wall. This is the best that AI could come up with, which isn't exactly my style, but it gives you the idea. But I would create these pieces that were artwork on the wall in 3D, right? With silk and dried flowers and so forth. So that was one of my specialties. And a lot of times I would go and get big pieces of driftwood or dead logs or, not huge logs, but maybe, 5 inches in diameter or something like that. Found objects. I would incorporate really interesting things into, think kind of rustic chic designs. I would do a lot of those, and they would end up going into nice high-end homes. And so that was my background, and it was nothing for me to go out in the woods or go on a beach and find some beautiful driftwood and incorporate these into my pieces for homes that had that rustic, natural feel, but they wanted something a little more contemporary. That was kind of my secret sauce. And so um, I took this picture of an abstract. And it was nothing for me to throw a piece of driftwood in front of this and break it up into a triptych and just mount it on the wall in front of the picture. Yet it ties those pictures together so beautifully. But a lot of times when I show this picture to someone, people are like, "I never would have thought of that." And that's what I'm talking about. For me, it was second nature, no pun intended, but for somebody else, it was way out of the box. So, to give you a little idea, this is a excerpt of where this was taken. So there's a bluff here, taken on a sunnier day, early in the morning, but there's a bluff here. About 20 feet down from the bluff is a beach. And we were flying over that beach, and that is when I captured that abstract shot. So right out here is my quick documentation shot. You can see the bluff. The sun's coming from behind, casting these huge long shadows. This is in Alaska. We're flying over to Lake Clark National Park. And I really loved these shadows in the beach. So right when we got over top of all of it, I shot that photo out my window, and this is approximately what I was capturing, right as we got right over it. And so that was this picture. And then I put a piece of driftwood over it because I just felt like it needed something to break up that black and it needed something to connect those three pieces. It has contrast. And I thought that looked beautiful. So for me, it was like a piece of driftwood without putting a bunch of flowers on it was a really simple way to go. Usually I'm like, start with the driftwood, add a bunch of flowers, and on and on. So for me, this was a short step, but I applied it to a new media, photography, instead of floral design. So for me, it wasn't that big of a deal. For somebody else, it was. And I'm not saying that to put myself on a pedestal. What I'm saying is that photography and creativity are iterative. So what seems surprising and unusual to one person is kind of everyday to another. But it took many steps before that to get to that point and to get to mashing up these two ideas and putting them together. I hope I'm making sense so far with that. But to anything that we do in photography and in life in general, we apply these to our challenges these things. So prior and current skills. I mean, that has to go into figuring out where's, oh, the snowblower needs keys. Like, okay, there's a few skills you had to learn before you learned that the snowblower needed keys. Prior and current experiences. You've probably had to turn something on or off with a key before, right? Your snowblower doesn't start. That's one option to maybe try a key. Prior successes. Hey, keys work in my car. Why don't we try it in a snowblower? And I'm being very simplistic here, but you get the idea. Prior failures. Oh, yeah, starting the car by hot wiring it, or, starting the car by pushing a button, or the snowmobile sometimes doesn't work. So that's a failure, but we learn from that as well. The emotions that can go into it, both good and bad. Current resources. All right, if you don't have a key, do you hotwire it, right? There's alternatives. Current limitations. Okay, maybe it's I don't know how to hotwire. And critical thinking, like how am I going to best solve this and what are my options, and kind of going through all of these things. And of course, trial and error is what ends up hopefully making you successful in the future. Well, we do these same things in photography. We just don't think about it so much. But these all go into a photograph, especially if you're doing it right. So the creativity and the artistry really are is iterative as solving a snowblower starting problem or solving a computer tech problem or a plumbing problem or any of the problems that you listed to me earlier tonight. They're not mystical, magical things. Creativity and artistry are just iterative problem solving. The more you know, the more you can try, the more you can do, the more you know what works and doesn't work. And that can be an advantage, and it can also sometimes be a disadvantage because we get into ruts every once in a while. And what does that mean? We're kind of out of options. We're out of, um, we kind of hit a brick wall. And so the more we start to learn about things, we push that brick wall further and further away from us, and we have more opportunity to be more creative. But the learning process is really no different in a creative world than it is in, sitting there solving an accounting problem. Or if you're a IT person creating code, um, maybe you found some workaround code to make a program work or a workaround to make your computer work. Those are tech-based things. Those tend to be left brain things, but they're actually really creative when you can solve them. And I've worked with a lot of IT people over my life. I used to work in software for almost, oh gosh, probably 15 years as well, related to the psychology, educational psychology background I had. And I know for a fact that they would come up with some really unique code to do something, but no one would go, "Wow, Jim, that was really artistic of you." Like they don't say that. Those words don't come out, bookkeeping. I don't know if you want your bookkeeper to be really artistic, but the point is that the problem solving and the learning and the creativity that goes into solving those problems is the same process as it is for something that is, in the art world. It's just we don't think of it that way, but we use those same skills. So the next time I run into an engineer who's like, I'm not very creative, I'm left-brained, I'm like, you have to use the same exact skills. It's all iterative. And I think for me and for many, when I get down to this point, it kind of was like, oh yeah, all right. It's a little more relief. I do have the creativity. This isn't something I wasn't born with. I can do it. It's like a muscle. It's just whether or not you've exercised it enough for photography, like you've exercised it for some of the other things you've done in your career. Think of doctors, the ones that are really good, have had a lot of experience in a lot of different things, and they can pinpoint that rare disease that's causing you to get, I don't know, hives or whatever. They do that by a lot of experience, a lot of trial and error, and they build that repertoire. Or maybe they're trying to treat something in a novel way and they can mash up, let's try this drug in a, kind of a non-normal way along with this therapy. And I think in this unique situation, these things might work. So you can be creative in no matter what thing you're doing, but sometimes we just, when it gets to art, we think people are born with it, and it's just not the case. So there's something called iterative design, and it's a design methodology based on a cyclic process of prototyping, testing and analyzing, and refining a product or process. And this is a real term, iterative design, but we sometimes, I don't think I've ever honestly heard it talked about in photography until I started putting this presentation together. I've really never seen it out there. But Picasso has a wonderful quote. And it's inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. And I feel like that is basically the iterative process encapsulated into a sentence. Inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. You have to keep churning away. If you can't kind of be super creative and inspired sitting in your living room chair. And if you are, it is probably because you're working at something. Maybe you're reading about something or drawing something out or researching something. You do have to work towards it. And ultimately, you have to keep photographing to hone those skills. And so here's another challenge, but this is just kind of how this works. So I'm doing a simplification of that iterative process. So let's say your goal is to create a better bear headshot. That's the challenge. And I'm going to apply all those things to this challenge in this iterative design, if you will. So here's the bear, first bear shot. And it's fine. I don't personally feel uh I don't feel that it really inspires me much. And Troy, I'm chuckling at your comment I just saw. If your bookkeeper is artistic, the IRS comes after you. You got what I'm saying. All right. So this is okay. And if it's your first bear shot, you're probably thrilled. But for me, it just leaves something to be desired, something with the composition. So, I don't know, something doesn't work quite. You've got a lot of background that's kind of stealing away my vision. You've got some dark holes back here. You've got some grasses that are a little bit distractive, that are distracting. It's just not, my favorite shot. So let's say you're like, okay, I'm going to try harder and I'm going to get closer. I'm going to still use those grasses, but now we're doing it in a little better way. This bear looks like it's stalking or a little bit more voyeuristic, if you will. I have done an unconventional crop on the ear. I've changed the aspect ratio. Everything just feels a little different. It's still a bare headshot, but it just feels a little bit different. It's not too different from this as far as the size and the frame, but the layout is different with the composition. And then that little unconventional crop that kind of just pulls you in a little bit more doesn't leave so much negative space as that one does. All right, so that's better. So then you're like, oh, yeah, closer is better. A little bit more of a voyeuristic view is better. So then you keep trying at it, and then you get really close. All right, so I've cut off all the ears, and I am super close to this bear. This bear is kind of looking away as it's moving forward, so there's some tension created there. You've got really good composition coming through here, kind of diagonal line here, rule of thirds executed well, all of that stuff. So then you get super excited. You're like, wow, I did close. I did closer. Now I'm doing really close. Let's go even tighter. And so you do that and you get something like that. And in this case, it's not that the tight is necessarily wrong, but all the other things are really wrong. And it's just an oops shot, right? It's too tight. It doesn't really convey anything for me. The bear doesn't have a great expression. The whole thing is just kind of ugly. Well, that's a learning opportunity, right? That's the trial and error. And you're like, oh, yeah, I went too far. Let's go back to something like this or this. I think that's where the sweet spot is. So then the next time you photograph a bear, you try one of those compositions and you start building that repertoire and somebody else will look at your shot and well, oh, that's a really neat composition, love the shot, and so forth. It becomes very reinforcing. This was not a very reinforcing shot. So that's when the law of effect comes in, right? And I've talked to you about that. So you recompose, you still get really tight. I've eliminated the ears. I am really tight on that face, but a little different angle, a little different light, and now you're getting more of that sweet spot that's really compelling as a bear shot. This was full frame, by the way. All right, so that learning then generalizes. You're like, well, if I used unconventional cropping, clipped off those ears, did something a little different, can I, you're excited about it. Now you're like, well, there's more things to photograph. Can I apply these to other things? Yeah, you can. That's how learning happens and generalizes to other things. So here's a beautiful immature eagle and the unconventional crop. A little tilt to the camera gives me some diagonal lines on this head, makes it a little more inquisitive looking, a little more compelling. So yeah, it works. Or this shot, this was actually done in a studio with a friend of mine's. She's a falconer, and we brought the bird into the studio to have some fun. So a nice low key shot, but again, clipping off the head, lots of negative space, things like that, but kind of applying those same techniques. So those are things that build our repertoire and build our imaginative skill. So we're coming back to this now. So imaginative skills, remember skill is something that can be learned? Well, the challenge in this case that I'm going to give is create a series of images from a really gray, dreary day flying over the Cook Inlet of Alaska. So, as a little bit of background, I specialize in Alaska. I have done more Alaska tours than anything else. I have visited Alaska. I'm probably at least in the 100 times or more space. I have lost count somewhere after like 70. I stopped counting, but I've been to Alaska a billion times since 2006. It is my happy place. And I've learned so much there over the years. So this challenge comes in, people come to my workshop and we do a lot of different things, but some of the time we fly over to Lake Clark National Park and it's a 30, 40-minute flight, depending on where we go. And sometimes the skies are gray and the tide is out, and it leaves a lot of this gray, silty mud to fly over on the edges of Cook Inlet. And to me, it's some of my most favorite stuff to photograph. It's like my guilty pleasure. You know, we're supposed to go for bears, and I'm like, oh, I hope the tide's low because I love photographing all these patterns in the muck. And so I challenge my group when these days happen where the tides are out when we fly over. And if it's a really gray, dreary day, it can be the perfect day to do this. Um, but people don't see it until I show them examples and then go help them find their own magic in the mud, so to speak. And so this is an example of that iterative depth that we're going to create, that creativity and the imaginative skill. Like, what can you see from all of this? So here we are in Alaska, and this is the Cook Inlet, this body of water right here. And we fly from about over here to somewhere over here. There's multiple spots I'll take people to. It just depends on the time of year and where the bears have migrated to. So flying over, there's an opportunity on low tide days for this mud. The tides are upwards of 25 feet from high tide to low tide. So it's really dramatic when you get it. So these are the mud flats, and we can fly over them. And you can see all these, sorry for my crappy cell phone footage. This is others in another plane here of my group. But you get all these really interesting patterns in the tundra. This is a gray day. But lots of interesting stuff to photograph as we fly over. And I'm going to apply all these things we talked about when we fly over to find some shots out of something that appears to give you nothing. And then we can also apply things like, hey, I've flown here before. I know abstract opportunities are abundant. So I share that with my group. I have strong post-processing skills to bring out the best in these photos. And of course, I can teach that to my group. I know image composition rules really well. I also know when we can break them. This flight's about an hour, given each way. We have time. And I have, in this case, a 24 to 7 f2.8 lens that I can use out the window of the plane. And I have a window seat, but so does everybody else because that's the way we do it. So here's my group. We're going to hop into a plane and we're going to head over. And depending on the time of year, it might be a wheeled bush plane or it could be a float plane. Again, depends on where we're heading. But anyway, hop in the plane, and here's what I know already doesn't work. Looking out the window and shooting shots of that, right? That's boring. It's not even really all that in focus, not exciting. But a lot of people will look out there, and that is what they see. They don't see a photograph in it. Flat and dark. It's a gray day. Sometimes you have your shutter speed up a little higher because you're in the air flying and you might have to underexpose a little bit. You can get these flat, dark, weird images. A little bit exciting, not that great. Post-processing would help. But if you don't know a lot about that, you don't see how it can help. Flat and more flat. There's some interesting patterns here. But again, this is not the image you're entering into the competition. This is the raw image. There's a lot we can do with this, but if you're not already exposed to post-processing in a way that is going to help this image, you don't see the image. You literally will fly right by. And this, impact is so important in photography. In this, yes, I see this little semicircle kind of thing here, but that doesn't have a lot of impact if that were entered into competition or hung on your wall. It's not going to be all that exciting. And then we land, and often when we land, we can spot bears out the window of the plane before we land and then get out and they're on the beach or wherever they might be. But we landed this particular day and there wasn't a thing. There wasn't even a bird when we started. There eventually were things, but we landed and there was nothing. And I was joking. I'm like, the only thing moving is this wave. And so I photographed a wave coming in, and this picture was truly meant to be a joke and wasn't a serious photograph. Um, and I look at that and go, so what? That's not doing anything for me. All right. So I want you to hold on to all of that because I am going to teach you a little bit more. So remember, creativity and artistry are iterative, and we apply what we already know to solve problems. But we're going to add some new knowledge because this helps us solve new problems and make some of those challenges easier. So, new knowledge. So, the art of manipulation, I like to call this. And I don't know about you, but most people kind of react negatively when you hear the word manipulation. And I don't blame you one bit. But as artists, we are manipulative. We don't necessarily mean it in a negative way. At least I hope most people aren't trying to be like manipulative in the traditional kind of deceitful, narcissistic sort of way. We are manipulative in creative ways that help people see our vision of what we saw. Whether it's a photograph, a sculpture, whatever, we are trying to convey what's in our brain and what we saw with our eyes and how we saw it to somebody else who wasn't there. And so there are ways that we can create our photographs both in camera and in post processing to give a certain feel to things, to make some things more important than others in a photograph and really bring them through the image from front to back by how we compose, how we post process, how we use the light, and so forth. So I'm going to do this quickly. This will apply, if this alone, I think, is enough. Like if I just did the presentation on this thing alone, you would walk away with some really important knowledge. So the art of manipulation, and artists are manipulative. So what I'm going to have you do is look at this picture. I'm going to give you about 3 more seconds to look at it. I want you to pick the thing that you think stood out to you the most. And now I'm going to put some numbers next to it. And in the chat room, I want you to type the number that you saw, the number that goes with the object that you saw first. There are no wrong answers, just the one that you kind of gravitate to first. Type that number in the chat window. And I'll give you about 10 more seconds to type in those responses. All right. Okay, so I'm going to draw the line in the sand there. And looking at the responses here, we've got a number of fours, a five, couple of fives there, a two, but by and large, the most responses were fours. Keep that in mind. We're going to come back to that in a minute. All right, so here is another one. Again, I want you to remember the number of the one shape that stood out to you the most. So close your eyes in this case. And now that you got them closed and open. All right, there's your next series of shapes. Pick the one that stood out to you the most. And again, it should be like an instant response. You don't have to think hard about this. And type in the number of the shape that you chose. And again, no wrong answers. This is just, I look at trends in data. I used to do a lot of data and research as a psychologist. I was heavily involved in research and data analysis as well. And so I'm always looking at trends. And in this case, and thanks for everybody who's responding. I love it. I appreciate it. We've got a lot of fours, a two, two twos, and the rest are fours, which are the vast majority. All right. So I'm going to just make a quick note in there and let's do the third one. So close your eyes and open. All right. Pick the first shape that stood out to you. And here are the numbers that go with it. Go ahead and type those in. And again, thank you so much for chiming in. It helps. It's hard to see a lot of data when one or two person people respond. So I appreciate that you're taking the time to do this with me. I have some groups that don't, and it makes it very painful. So thank you. All right, so I've got a smattering here. I've got one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight fives. And I have one, two, three, three threes. So more people picked five than three, but we had several of each responses. All right, great. Thank you for that. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So, these are the shapes that you chose. So the first one, the majority picked four. The second one, the majority picked four, and I think there were one or two people that picked two. And then the third one, most people picked five, and a few people picked three. All right, so what drew you to most of those shapes? You guys, go ahead and type that in the chat window. All right, getting a nice bunch of responses here. Thank you so much. Brightness or contrast? Brightness, the contrast. Seeing many comments about contrast. We have a central location, brightness, question marks, and contrast. So looking at that data, by and large, the people that responded with contrast, and I'll kind of lump brightness into that as well, are the majority of the people. And again, your experience is yours. Nothing is right or wrong, but I'm looking at trends. So most people said contrast. And in this case, you would be very correct in that contrast plays a huge role in that. There may be other variables, but contrast has a huge role. In your brains, we are compelled to look at things in this order most of the time. Not all the time, but the vast majority of the time. We look for the brightest thing first, or we notice the brightest thing first, and then the darkest thing. Sometimes it's reverse, depends on some ambient situations. But by and large, our first notion is to look at the brightest thing first and then the darkest. And it doesn't matter what we look at, whether I open the fridge or drive down the road or read a magazine with pictures or look in my closet to figure out what to wear, take a photograph, look at a photograph, whatever, watch a movie. It tends to be the brightest thing first, followed by the darkest thing. When the brightest and darkest thing are next to each other, that supersedes just the bright thing or just the dark thing. Our eyes wanted to go to that highest point of contrast. That is like an innate response with vision. We can't train our eyes to look for the mid-tone thing first. It is just a natural thing. It's like, when you do the tap on the knees and your leg goes up and down, the reflexes, it is like a reflex. We can't teach our brain to do something different than that. And even if you try, you tend to, it's just like it's a habit you can't break because it's innate. So your eye goes to the brightest thing first and then the darkest. But where the brightest and darkest things are juxtaposed right next to each other, it goes there very first. That's like eye candy, right? So it happens no matter what I show you. So here are just stripes. But your eye may see all the stripes, but it tends to keep wanting to come back here or over here. And there may be a few other places it sort of then gravitates to, but if you stare at the whole screen, those black and white bars just pull you right back there. It doesn't matter how I arrange these things, the same thing happens. We might find other patterns that are interesting, but by and large, the brightest and darkest tend to pull our eyes in. Here's another one. So just giving you that idea. So now in photography terms, it's how you create an image and where that contrast or lack of contrast is placed that helps our eyes go to the places we want them to go and avoid the places we don't want them to go. And it doesn't matter whether we use black and white or shades of gray, the same thing happens every time. So if I want to do this as an intentional camera movement or shutter drag style shot of a bamboo forest, well, I can shoot it, but how I shoot it and where I put my camera For example, in these lighter pieces of bamboo, I know I'm going to put those in the rule of thirds because people's eyes are going to go there. That is a nice place to put them. And then I'm going to move my camera up and down. And what I did for this one is hold my camera steady for a quick moment and move it up and down while that camera shutter is open. So partially still while it's open and partially moved while it's open gives me that impressionistic view. But these lighter things are, I put them there for a reason. Because I knew your eyes would go there. That is the rule of thirds in this, vertical third. I thought that would be a good spot to put them. Here's an example with three different pictures of the same thing. So here's one. Notice where your eyes go. Here's two. Again, notice where your eyes tend to go. And here's three. Notice where your eyes tend to go. If you want to do that again, there's one, there's two, and there's three. So notice how different areas of the picture are emphasized based on where I put the most brightness, the most contrast. It tends to make your eye look at a certain area first and come back to that area. So I'll do it one more time. There's the first, second, and third. So I can emphasize things by de-emphasizing other things and bringing up the brightness and contrast in other areas. I kind of think of it like a symphony where certain things are playing louder than others, but it all comes together and can work or not work depending on how that's arranged. So, you're turning the volume up on certain things and turning the volume down on others. All right. So then when it applies to photography, I can take a rather drab image like this and apply some contrast and brighten certain things and darken certain things, and that makes it more visually interesting compared to that. You kind of don't, you know where to look, but it's sort of blah. But when I do that, it definitely gives the image more impact. Or this one here. Really, I mean, this is just a snapshot, but really sort of basic and boring. But if I tone down certain areas and brighten up certain areas, now I start to not just look at the horse's butt, because that's a big dark thing here. Now I'm paying more attention to the shoulders, the withers, the road that takes me back to another horse over here that I bet you didn't even notice over here. So again, this is just a quick Photoshop job. I'm not saying this is a 10 out of 10 photo. It's just showing how light and shadow change the perception of the image, what you notice, when you notice it, and it can pull your eye away from things that are less important, like this fence or all this extra road, or it can help highlight this horse that just looks kind of drab over here, and you don't even really notice it. So, you can manipulate the viewer. Here's a lovely picture of a young bear. But with all this extra stuff in here, the dark holes back here, some of the light blobs, all of that, and the eyes being really dark, it's troubling. But if I lighten it up and clean it up, and I minimize the contrast back here, it makes me go more to the bear's eyes. Let's do this one. Notice, by the way, our brightest thing here is the fur because it's a little bit side lit on an overcast day. That's the brightest thing. The darkest thing are these holes back here, and maybe the eyes, which dark thing against a mid-tone, and I really want to connect with those eyes, but if I clean that up and brighten things up, it makes a completely different image. All right, so that's our new knowledge nugget. So contrast is manipulative, and we're going to use that to our advantage. It adds impact if you do it right. It can be done in post-processing or in camera or both, depending on what you're working with and what subject and what lighting you have available. Sometimes it's a composition choice. Get rid of a dark rock in the background that's pulling my eye there, or, some white tuft of something off to the side that's really not important to the image, but keeps pulling my eye. Like it's all about how you compose in camera, use the light in camera, and the post-processing afterwards. And done well, contrast is very pleasing. Lack of contrast can be very pleasing as well in the right areas. Not new knowledge, contrast works well with images that are monochromatic. I showed you in a few black and white examples there are monochromatic images. So now we can apply all of the new knowledge to the things that we already have learned. So that's our new nugget to add to the repertoire. So new knowledge, people like images with contrast. Monochromatic is the way to go today because in Alaska, on that flight that I showed you, it's overcast and dreary and so forth. So applying that to some of these photos, remember that wave shot. Pretty boring, not exciting, pointless, frankly. But you could apply this in a simple way and go, okay, well, let me change it to black and white and play up the contrast. I did this and I broke it out as a triptych. So now I have a black and white, strong contrast. Then the triptych adds more contrast. It's more white against the black. Put it in a contemporary room. I think that simple picture is actually surprisingly elegant for such a simple shot. Then you could mirror it and create an abstract, and that alone creates quite a lot of visual impact with the black and white and then the separation of all of those six pictures. Or something like this here. Now, this was captured flying over those mud flats, and it's all right. But if I played up the contrast, sometimes it can go a little too much. But what if I did it as a sepia? Put it in a room like this, break it up as a triptych, gives a little visual relief, and it's also more exciting because you're adding contrast with the two images instead of one. Now it works pretty well. This one here, one of my favorites. I absolutely love the braided rivers in Alaska coming out from these glacial outflows. They're so cool. But this picture, if I showed this to my neighbor, she'd be like, I don't get it, right? But if you played it up and you did a strong black and white contrast, and you broke it up into an asymmetrical diptych. I think it's super cool. You have two beautiful main leading lines here. They complement each other very well. Get a little visual relief with this gap here, and it also adds more contrast with the separation. Nice choice for a wall in a more contemporary space. Or this one here, I called it flat and flatter. I think or flat and more flat, I think is what I call this. And it is, it's a flat mud pile, basically. The mud flats with these little ravines going through them. But play that up with the texture and the contrast. And I did, and this isn't just sliders, right, in Lightroom. This is some of that. And then a lot of, individual work, getting in with a small brush and lightening and darkening things the way I saw fit. But oh my gosh, take that picture, put it on a big wall in a room that, you could have any kind of colors in the room because it's black and white. Here's just simple so you can see the big impact of that. That'd be stunning in a lobby. It's abstract. You could break it up as a diptych or triptych as well. It has so much potential. And yet it barely would get noticed by most people flying over it. So this is what I'm talking about. New knowledge adds to what you can already do. Creativity is iterative. It gives you more of an idea for mashups and so forth. So I'm going to add a little more new knowledge. Adjusting color with monochromatics can also be the way to go. These are simple things you can do. But adjusting color, so taking this area, so this is part of our flight in Alaska. There's a little bit of sun breaking through the clouds here, but look at this gorgeous braided river. This is stunning. I could fly around this. Look at the patterns here and through here. I literally don't even need to go to Bears. I could just fly around this and photograph it while the tide's out. I adore this stuff. But, brown mud isn't always that appealing. So what else can we do with it to make it otherworldly? So this was one excerpt of that scene, and I think let's go back to the end of this video. It was somewhere in here. I don't remember quite where, but you get the idea. There's the shot. That's dark and murky and ugly, but there are elements that are pretty cool. So what if I played up the contrast and the exposure and pulled the blues into it, right? Just tinted it more blue with your temperature control in Lightroom or Camera Raw or whatever you choose to use. And I did a pano style because those look better over sofas and mantles and things like that than the traditional aspect ratio. Now, to me, it almost looks like paisley pattern, or I don't know, there's so much depth to it. I feel like you could almost fly in between and other underneath these layers. And that is literally the execution of contrast, is creating more of that depth. It's the same scene as this, and it's the same scene that we saw over here. It is the same, but playing it up in post and making some blue tones out of it just gives it a different feel. You could do any kind of colors with this, but it's just something different. Same with this. This had not much impact, and my eye kept poorly just going to the middle here. But what if I recomposed it a little bit, pulled in some of that blue, and then played up some of the highlights? So this was not very bright. This river wasn't very apparent, nor were most of these things over here. But if I play them up a little bit more, we actually have a gorgeous S curve through here. This sandbar creates a unique look in this one here, but it's just an abstract with a lot more impact, and the whole picture sort of has importance now instead of just one little, you know, semicircle right here. So here's another example. This is in Yellowstone, and people walk right by this. I was co-leading a workshop year before last. I loved this scene. I'm like, oh my God, this is so gorgeous. And people are like, I don't get it. And I was, and I'm trying to explain because obviously I don't have a computer out there to show you what we can do with this. But I'm like, okay, you have this beautiful S curve through here, and you have this lovely texture, this beautiful branch and the grass that anchor this. I'm like, go vertical. You have an interesting little line in the clouds. Like all of this just moves my eye from front to back. So pretty. But if you can't know a lot about contrast in post-processing, you can't get to this, which I thought this was really interesting. Now this is just the raw image. I still personally would do a little denoising, but I just want to show you what playing up contrast can do. So we have more interesting sky. We have this curve that is more beautiful. The branch at the bottom, black and white. You see the textures in the snow. It's much more dramatic, but people miss that. But if you know about contrast, you know post-processing can help, you know how contrast is manipulative. Now you can help move people through this image and know exactly how much more to emphasize the contrast or de-emphasize it in certain areas. So it's about what you know plus what you imagine that solves those challenges. And knowing and imagining is the artistry. That's how you get to the point. I think of Picasso again. He didn't start out with eyes in weird places and noses moved around on the faces of his classic paintings. He started out doing very standard portraiture, very typical classic portraiture, and he ended up over the years in this crazy place with, the eyes and the noses moved around and all of those types of artworks. Um, he did an amazing job out of that, but he didn't start that way. It's iterative, and the more you learn, the more you try, the more you grow, the more you sometimes get controversy over your images. You start to learn who likes your stuff, who doesn't, and you kind of develop an audience for that. Um, it's just an amazing process. And so fostering that creativity is just so important. So, I think I jumped ahead a little bit. I am going to stop. Oh yeah, I do a couple more quotes for you. Sorry. I forgot I added these. Just a couple more little things. Creativity is fueled by wondering. And I loved this quote by the Dalai Lama. I believe that the most important thing for humanity is its creativity. And I do agree with that. We have to be creative. If we're not, we're just kind of stuck in the water doing nothing, right? Here's another interesting quote. This is Infinite Potential, The Life and Ideas of David Bohm. And he was the first, in the first documentary about a man called Einstein, called it his spiritual son, and the Dalai Lama, his science guru. So this guy knows his stuff, right? Um, and this documentary is interesting. The documentary is about him, but he did a lot of advances in quantum theory, neuroscience, and mathematics. All things that you don't think of as being like creative works, but they are. And I loved his quote. His quote is, "Creativity is the radical discontinuity in a pattern of thought." So, hence those simple challenges that I gave you, mashups. Take things that don't go together and make them go together. Make a boring eagle shot and a silhouette and, throw a few things at it. Keep that in your repertoire. Look for moments with that. Focus on that. Come up with something different that people aren't doing. Miriam Louisa Simon, she used to teach a lot of classes at a university in California about creativity. And she always said, creativity, it's always hiding just the other side of words, just beyond articulation, and yet evidence of its workings spreads out across the terrain. And also, creativity cannot be prescribed. There's no specific path or place or technique or tool to unlock it. It's an awakening. And I really feel that that is true. And if you can do some of these techniques, you're awakening and giving yourself more tools to use to solve creative problems. But there is no single recipe for it. And the last quote I'm going to leave you with here is nothing is a mistake. There's no win and no fail. There is only make. And that's by Karita Kent. And I really believe this. And I feel sometimes we're so competition oriented that we're always trying to go for this perfection and we lose the ability to play. We keep doing things that we're comfortable doing and getting better at that. Nothing wrong with that. But we don't provide I tend to find many photographers are more competitive than they are compassionate, and we don't sometimes get together as a group and feel comfortable in our inability to do something or feel comfortable in just playing and experimenting. And even if it's wrong, you're learning something by all the things. My aunt used to say, you learn something from everything you do. Even if you learn, you never want to do it again. And so I do feel like we sometimes need to get back to that safe place to play. Uh, we're like, it's like keeping all of our inabilities dark secrets and we only showcase the best of the best. Nothing wrong with showcasing our best, but I really do feel that if we rewarded the creative process instead of just the outcome, we might be better as photographers and really come up with some new and unique things that we appreciate, but it is iterative. So as we leave tonight, I just want to say, are finding our artistry, you have to discover the potential. You have to remember things like composition. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not throwing out rules we already know well. Sometimes playing with those rules can be important. But you have to consider all the tools you have, the camera, the lenses, the perspectives, the post-processing, filters, all those things can come into play, but you still got to use your brain and think of each thing as problem solving. You walk out in a field, you don't know what to shoot. Don't think of that as nature didn't give you something. Think of it as a problem to solve and then start applying your problem solving strategies. And those things like mashups are now a part of their problem solving. Limit yourself to find unlimited artistry. I find one of the best things you can do is go out with one lens and even better, one focal distance. Like I'm going to shoot today at 100 millimeters. What are you going to find? How are you going to use that distance? And it narrows your mind into really pursuing one thing instead of having the whole smorgasbord in front of you and it's all overwhelming and you can't do anything well. So often we come up with so many, lenses that we need to get and walk out there with all this equipment. And it's like all the time you're going, oh, I wish I had this lens on. Then you're spending your time switching lenses and then. Just go out with one. You probably heard that before, but just really focus on the problem solving with one lens and see what you come up with. All right, so my friends, you made it. You did it. We are finished with the presentation. I will certainly take your questions and discussion. And one of the things I also wanted to mention is that if you are interested in some of the learning things that I have, and we'll be coming up with some new things again this year, we'll be doing some webinars, free sessions. We have some things in the works that I can't share all the details on yet, but I think you'll be very excited to see some of those things that we'll be doing online and interactively, as well as my classes and workshops. And if you are on my mailing list, that is the best way to get notified about the workshops. They sell out typically before they're ever made public. So what we do when we're releasing something new is we will send you an email and we'll say, hey, here's the workshop that's coming up for registration on such and such date. We're going to do a webinar on this particular date about it so you can see what it is, ask your questions, all those kinds of things. And then we will release it on, such and such date. So if we say the webinar is March 1st, we might release the registration on March 5th or something like that for our webinars. When you get that email, you want to plan to be at the computer at that date and time that we tell you so that you can jump in on the class because they do fill up very quickly. But I don't typically start out advertising them to the public. We advertise to our newsletter first, and they're typically gone before I would ever get to promote it elsewhere. So I highly recommend joining that list. I don't send spam, and I don't even email that often, so you don't have to be worried about stuffing up your inbox. But we will have some free and other things as well to join. All you need to do is you can just hold your phone, open up your camera on your phone, hold it on this QR code, and you'll get a little yellow box. You click that, and then you can join. or you can go to langellphotography.com and you can just head over to my website and click on join the click. So that would be, let's see here, I'll do it real quick for you. So langellphotography.com. And then you can click join the click and fill out that little form. And then you will be on our mailing list. Check your spam if for some reason you don't get things in your inbox. But all right, on that note, I'm going to stop and take any questions. And hopefully you found this helpful and inspirational. And you can unmute yourself if you like at this point as well. Anybody have anything to say or questions? I see some things in the chat room, but you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and chat along with me if you like. Marianne, I see your comments. I see Merry Christmas. Same to all of you. I appreciate so much you bringing me in tonight. And if there are no other comments or questions, I'll let you go for the evening. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. I wish you a really good holiday season and a wonderful new year. I hope to see you on the trail at some point. Feel free and email me as well if you have any questions. And there is my email in the inbox or in the chat window for you as well. So thank you so much, everyone. You have a wonderful evening, and I will talk to you soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lisa. This
Thank
was
you.
lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Do you want me to end this, Steve, or do you have more
Go
stuff
ahead and
afterwards?
you can
Okay.
go ahead and end it.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.